across America. Live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Friday weekend edition, and we're grateful that you can join us. We're going to be talking, as you might imagine, a little bit about religious liberty. We're going to be talking about the Chief Justice, as well as one of the Associate Justices on the Supreme Court. Midterm elections right now, so we'll get into some of that and a number of other studies. Of course, we have been talking about Iran and Islam all week, so there will be lots to cover. We have in studio with us Kelly Shackelford, President, CEO, and Chief Counsel, First Liberty Institute. Great to see your face once again.
It's good to be in one place. Been moving around a lot.
Yes, you've been very busy. And let me introduce for the very first time Garrett Bell, who is Associate Counsel at First Liberty Institute. And, of course, we were talking off air about being at the University of Kentucky and getting your law degree from Washington University in St. Louis. And it's great to have you here as well.
Great to be here.
But, Kelly, if nothing else, the first article is about California religious discrimination case. But if you tie that into one out of Liberty University, it reminds me of a conversation you and I have had. You were hoping to maybe get rid of Lemon. You did. Maybe Smith. I think that's happening. Hardison. But the other one you'd always like to get rid of is Locke versus Davey. And it does seem to me that both of these cases go back to a case that says you can use any kind of curriculum in homeschool, as long as it's not religious. You can actually have access to any kind of major at Liberty University, as long as that's not religious. And that seems discriminatory. So these two cases, could you explain for a few minutes?
Yeah, I mean, it is discriminatory. I mean, the two cases, so let's take first the Woolard, which we just filed in the Supreme Court.
Yes.
This is a case where in California, they say, look, we've got this sort of government charter school, so we're going to allow you, if you're homeschooling, to get reimbursement for your educational materials. And so if you're a parent who's homeschooling and using educational materials, you can get reimbursement unless there's anything religious. Now, wait a second.
Wait a minute.
We had a Supreme Court case on this issue. It was much more severe than reimbursing materials. It was you can choose a religious school. When Maine said, no, we're not going to allow you to choose a religious school. Mm-hmm. And the Supreme Court said, now this is like, 3 years ago? 6-3, unconstitutional. So they think, going to the school and having the government pay for the religious school, that's okay. But we can't reimburse you for your materials. I mean, it's just crazy. It's like, oh, I'm not following that Supreme Court decision. The other one, at least, is a little bit, you understand where they're getting it from, and that is we have a student that we represent. Mm-hmm. Steve Fitchen is lead counsel on it. I've known Steve for years, but we're co-counsel.
Right.
And this student, you get a scholarship in Virginia. You can get some reimbursement. And she was entitled to it until you can be a music major.
Yes, she was a music major.
But you can't be a music major
because you worship. Yeah.
Because you worship.
Yeah.
So it reminds me of the old cases when they would try to say, you can't play like Handel's Messiah, right? Or a band at a high school band couldn't play A Mighty Fortress Is Our God. Now, what we had to tell them later was, do you know where that tune came from? It was a beer drinking hall tune that they took over to put Christian words to. So the idea that music, is religious or non-religious, it's just the words you use, but it's just completely, I mean, how obviously discriminatory is that? We're not going to treat you the same because you're religious or what you're singing is religious. It's again, we've dealt with this, I thought, and now the neat thing about the case with Brittany and the state of Virginia is it really goes back to what you mentioned, Locke v. Davey.
Right.
And Davey was a guy who, again, just wanted to be treated equally, and because he wanted to be in the ministry, they took his scholarship away, his money away. Well, the amazing thing, I just love the way God does this.
I was hoping you were going to bring this
That
up.
caused Davey to go to Harvard Law School.
Mm-hmm.
And Davey is now a lawyer. In fact, he's the lawyer
Yes.
in this case.
I'm so glad you brought that
and
up.
so what a wonderful thing it would be for them to take this case, reverse, and he would be a part of the clean circle of wiping out this horrible ruling that's discriminatory that's been in place now for many years.
Garrett, let me come to you for just a minute, because I did mention some of these cases, because I remember a time when there were people like Kelly and others saying, we got to get rid of this lemon test. It's a mess, and then you have the Smith case out of Oregon, the Hardison case, which is a TWA case, and one after another, these have been eliminated in many cases by First Liberty lawsuits, and this particular 2 cases are now before the Supreme Court, and I think this one is on life support. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, for one, I mean, getting to work for a place like First Liberty, where I was in law school, from 2019 to 2022, and I'm sitting there reading Lemon, and I'm reading some of these cases where, man, we really lost grounds. It seems like religion has been completely stripped from the public sphere. And then, I finished my law degree. I go work for a couple of years, real estate. I get to come to First Liberty, and yeah, they've laid this groundwork of like, oh, by the way, we overturned Lemon. and I'm trying to explain to some of my other buddies that went to law school, like, you guys are, you're
out of date.
They're smacking their heads about some kind of indemnification clause, looking like, what am I doing? And I get to be touching cases, that are setting precedent for generations. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think it is.
Go ahead.
Well, Kelly, I was just going to say that I get the First Liberty Insider. I encourage people to do so. You click on the picture either of Kelly or Garrett. It will take you to the bottom, and you can sign up if you haven't. It says 7 First Liberty cases are now at the Supreme Court, and I found out from you it's now up to 9.
It is. We're going to be following the next.
That's a prayer target.
2 more on their way, and then another big news that we'll announce here in a week or so. We've actually got 9 where we're asking them to take the case, but we've got one that they've actually already taken, and we're about to be announced. And that argument will probably be in December at the U.S. Supreme Court. A really important case on parental rights. Mm-hmm. So. Just an amazing time. I mean, it really is. And people don't understand how hard it is to get a case to the Supreme Court. I mean, first you have to shepherd it correctly through the system and not have mistakes and things to get a case that would be Supreme Court possible. And even when you get it possible, there's, 6,000, maybe even 7,000 requests a year, and they took 56 last year.
Wow.
So to have another case that we're going to be at the Supreme Court this year is amazing, and it's on things like you mentioned, religious freedom, changing precedents that had been really bad for most of our lives that are now flipping. And so God is really doing a great work in the country because this is opening things up for people all across the nation.
Well, again, you heard it here first on Point of View. Let's take a break. When we come back, a very good piece by, of course, Judge James Ho about Clarence Thomas and an interview that Ted Cruz has done. So we're going to talk about what's going on in the Supreme Court right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Lack of commitment is one of the biggest problems in marriage and relational formation. J.P. DeGance has been on my radio program to talk about what the church needs to do to build strong marriages and strengthen existing ones. In the past, we've talked about his initial research. This time, he talked about 2 factors that are hurting marriage commitment. Cohabitation is the first negative factor in marriage. As I've mentioned in previous commentaries, we discussed also on the radio, cohabitation has gone from being rare to routine. He reported that most engaged couples seeking premarital counseling are living together. That mindset changes from "till death do us part" to "as long as love shall last." His latest statistics suggest that couples that cohabit have a 60 to 80% higher divorce rate. The other negative factor in marriage is dating apps. The linked article has the sensational title, "Dating Apps Are Treating People Like Shoes on Amazon." He argues that these apps are not neutral tools. They are structurally harmful to the kind of relational orientation that healthy marriages require because they treat potential partners as commodities. It is essentially becoming a business model of cost-benefit analysis that has become optimized for consumer choice and frictionless exit. This is not the mindset you want to have if you want to build strong marriages and families. These apps train users in habits that work against commitment. The subtitle of the attached article is "Here's What That Means for the Church." That is why I raise this issue. Pastors and Christian leaders need to warn young adults of the mindset that develops once you use these dating apps. If you want a congregation of strong marriages and stable families, we need to address this issue. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hey, once again, I thought we'd talk about the Supreme Court for just a little bit, but in particular focus on Clarence Thomas. Now, if you've been out and about, you might have seen the fact that Senator Ted Cruz has written about this. You can actually see some very good interviews that have surfaced on YouTube about that. But Kelly pointed this one out, and I thought it was great. It was in National Review. James Ho is an individual we have quoted many, many times, an individual that indeed understands some of the aspects of what it's like to be a judge, but I thought this may have been the best analysis and reflection on Clarence Thomas that I've ever seen. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree. Judge Ho is kind of known for being a judge of courage. Judges, people don't, let me describe this a little bit for people. Judges are people who've done well, generally, in law school, right? They've always gotten sort of golden stars, and they're used to collecting the golden stars. So, why would you expect them to go against the flow, even if it means doing the right thing, if, you're going to get criticized and all that? It's always with human nature, right? People, let's say you're a judge, you probably like to be a higher judge. So you'd probably like to either be elected or be appointed or whatever. So what you don't want is like a case that is really controversial and will split people down the middle 50-50 because you're going to anger 50% of the people. So what the judges have created is a lot of rationale and little technical things where they go, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I would really love to get to that issue, but I can't because technically I'm not allowed to address that issue." And they have this little thing in the law they've created, and there's like a bunch of these. But it just shows that they don't want to upset people, right? Well, Jim Ho is kind of the opposite. He just doesn't care.
Yeah.
He's like, you know what, and it's not just the general public; it's the other judges,
Right.
Because when you
Peer pressure.
when you stand on what the Constitution says in that situation, you expose all the others who are not standing for what the Constitution says, and they don't like that. You don't get invited to the parties, and you get really shunned. And so that's what I thought was so good about Judge Ho's sort of summary of Ted Cruz's book on Justice Thomas is it helped because he understands it. If you look at the opinions, Judge Ho is often standing alone.
Yes.
Okay. And that's what he's writing about. He did never mention himself, but this is why he understands it, and it's so beautifully written. That's what Justice Thomas, who he clerked for, did. He was the only person writing that opinion, that dissent, that concurrence, and he doesn't move because public opinion, which is what we saw when they tried to browbeat him in his confirmation hearing.
Oh yeah.
And that's so hard to find. Right? I mean, and it was just a great description of what a really excellent judge is. They follow the law. It's similar to a pastor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a pastor who's going to be faithful to the word? Or do you have a pastor who's going to be swayed by pressure, by, they're not going to like it if I preach this, even though this is what the Bible says. They're not going to like it, so I think I'll skip this one and I'll go to something else. It's very similar, but it's what takes a good judge. And so I would highly encourage people to go to pointofview.net, click on this and read this. It's just a beautifully written and very accurate description of Justice Thomas and Senator Cruz's book on him.
Again, about 5 pages. Now, again, I would encourage you to get Ted Cruz's book, and I'd love to get him on sometime to talk about the book going further. But I was just thinking about this for a minute, Garrett, because Judge Ho says, judges are first and foremost human beings susceptible to the same temptations and psychoses that consume others. But here's just a couple of examples. In the case of Prince versus the United States, Justice Thomas was the only justice to urge the court to reaffirm that the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms is a personal right. Well, eventually that came to Heller and a few things like that. And then another good example is in the case of Dobbs, which is the abortion issue. He also authored the single opinion urging the court to overturn Obergefell, which of course is the whole issue of same-sex marriage. So you know what it's like probably, Garrett, even in law school or sometimes with other lawyers, to stand up and speak and know that everybody else disagrees with you, but still be bold enough to do so.
Absolutely. WashU was not short of people who disagreed with me on fundamental things, and neither was the city of Austin. But so I can tell you, you have hesitation of saying what you believe is true because you know they're going to come after you. And we're not just talking about the pressure of public opinion. We have judges coming out and saying, I fear for my life.
Yes.
Their lives are being threatened. And so for him to still say, I'm going to do the right thing, that's very admirable. And what stood out to me is the end of this article where he says, the thing that allows me to remain steady is an abiding faith. I use my litany of humility. I don't know if you've ever read the litany of humility, but it says things like, I'm going to praise the person that is elevated above me. That if they go before me and I stay back, God, I'm still going to praise you for that. I'm going to be thankful for that. And that is that's a hard thing to admit to yourself and humble yourself to do as an attorney.
One of the things I think is so striking, and Kelly, you and I have been following this for years, just the really harsh things that our friends at the New York Times have said about him and many other justices have said about him. And of course, he is one individual that has penned more solo dissents than the rest of the members of the court. Although it does point out John Paul Stevens did, but that was sort of a different reason for that. But here, it just, I think, illustrates again that you could certainly go along because, as it later talks about, your law clerks influence you, the media influences you. You can sort of feel like you're out on an island sometimes if you take a really strong stand on the Supreme Court opinion.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt. I mean, that's what Justice Thomas has been doing his entire career. And realize he's only 2 years away from being the longest-serving justice
Isn't that amazing?
On the United States Supreme Court in the history of our country. So that's a long time to stand alone. Now, again, a lot of his things where he stood alone are now majority opinions.
Shows the impact.
It's a rare quality to have, and it's what's made him part of what's made him such a great justice.
Well, I thought just for another minute or two, since, of course, this is a Christian program, Senator Cruz, this is a quote from, again, Judge Ho, Senator Cruz also spills much ink examining Justice Thomas's faith journey. And that's essential, he says. In an ideal world, being a Christian should have nothing to do with being a good judge, because the text is the text about that. But in this fallen world where fancy federal judges are often offered the forbidden fruit of elite acceptance, being a Christian has everything to do with being a good judge. And it does seem to me that that's another part of that. If you've ever read his memoir, My Grandfather's Son, we are learning about how his grandfather and he certainly involved the Christian faith. There are a lot of verses that are mentioned there and a variety of others. So it does illustrate that there's another part of Clarence Thomas that you wouldn't know by reading some of the opinion pieces about him in the New York Times.
Well, yeah, again, it's a character issue, right? And think of it especially if you're a federal judge, you're appointed for life. Mm-hmm. Nobody votes you out. Nobody says, bad decision. So you have incredible power, right? And even one of the most seductive things is the power to do good. So you might get a case and the law might not say what you want it to say, but you might want to do good for people.
Yeah.
And so you can see how easily justifiable that kind of thinking is, right? So it takes real humility, real Christian humility to say, yes, I've been given this power, but I am going to use it for what I promised I would use it for. I'm going to interpret and faithfully, follow the law and lay that out for people, even if I think the law is not right. I mean, the pride that would tell you, well, I can do good, is also the pride that tells you, I'm going to insert my decision over an entire legislature, right? An entire state of people, an entire federal government, because I don't think the legislators got it right, or I don't think the founders got it right, or whatever. You can see how you've got the power. You can do what you think is good. It takes real humility, and Thomas does this a lot, where he says, I don't even agree with this law, but that's not my job.
Right.
This is what it says.
And you've had he and other justices say, actually, legislature, you need to do your job because we're not going to do it for you, which I think is humility as well. Well, we've got these midterm elections, so we're going to take a break and talk about that right after this.
There are so many big stories happening literally everywhere. So much information, documents released, grand jury testimony, political accusations and claims on all sides. How in the world can any of us keep up? How do we weed out the truly important from the merely sensational? None of us can do it alone. I've been in media for more than 45 years. I've trained my skills, and yet even with that, I am glad for the more than 50-year track record of the team here at Point of View. They help us to cut through the noise and focus on the authentically important. More than that, biblically informed eyes to help us understand and develop ways to respond effectively. Providing what we need takes time and resources, and your partnership makes it all possible. Click on into pointofview.net, hit the donate button, or call 1-800-347-5151. Please give today. Better, sign up and help monthly. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, we're in the midst of these midterm elections and would love to get your thoughts. So we're going to open up the phones to get your thoughts about what's happening in your community. 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. Let me hold this up. This was the March issue of Outlook, which of course is somewhat dated, but it talks about midterm elections, what's at stake. Now, I think we did pretty good at guessing what was some of the issues. Affordability is one of the articles in there, the whole issue of the economy and a variety of others. But our November issue, which is now being written, which you will be receiving before, of course, you vote, is also entitled The Midterm Elections, What's at Stake, because we recognize the issue of socialism has become a really big issue. And so we're going to be talking about that as well. So if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Kelly Shackelford, Garrett Bell, and a couple of issues. First of all, the advantages and disadvantages the coming midterm elections. Garrett, you probably are a student of history. I could see from your background, you took history classes, sociology classes, political classes. And if you look at this, history really is against the Republicans, because what usually happens is the president's party usually loses in the midterms. There are some exceptions, but those are the exceptions. And so in some respects, there has always been a feeling that Republican candidates are facing some very significant headwinds. And so one of the things Mark Lewis is talking about is just those headwinds. The other one, which gets into, will we going to have any, let's be nice, election irregularities, and that's going to be an issue as well. So what about this? Because we are in the midst of the election season, and I think we're going to see a lot of people talking about what's coming next. What do you think might be happening?
Yeah, the author of the article mentions that, look, we can't ignore voter fraud, and bringing up the fact that we haven't passed the Save America Act yet. I do think that maybe that is certainly an issue, and I think that maybe the author is elevating that issue higher than it needs to be, and that I think the economy and cost of living, those are going to be the main issues that are going to affect the midterms. Obviously, Iran is very much wrapped up in that. Not necessarily the war in itself, but what the war is doing to, again, prices. Gasoline is going up. We're seeing that work its way down the supply chains. Yeah, I wish I had a crystal ball and knew where we were headed, but I don't. But yeah, that is certainly, if you just talk to anyone, that's on the top of their mind.
Yeah, there's a lot of, normally if it was just, you would look at this and say it's a midterm, so there's going to be a flip back, right? And if people wonder why that is, it isn't like there's been a massive change in the beliefs of the people. Mm-hmm. It's that what happens is, those who are in power usually are a little more complacent. So there's a percentage of their people that won't go vote in the midterms because they kind of like who we have as the president, so they don't go vote. And so the congressmen and the senators who kind of need their vote don't do so well. And the people who are out of power are just infuriated by what they're seeing. And so they're energized. And so they show up and they vote. And this is why you almost always have this flip. So you've got that just naturally, which occurs. And then lay on top of that the Iran, war, which then causes these economic problems. Now, let me be clear, though. Under Biden, inflation was like 30%. Okay, Trump has had the inflation down pretty good, but everybody is still suffering from what happened under Biden. And then Trump didn't make it better. He just has it kind of on a normal rate. So people are like, no, I'm not looking for status quo from Biden. I want everything changed. And the problem is that doesn't happen. Inflation never goes up and then goes down.
It's like a ratchet. Yeah, it just keeps going up.
Once the prices are up, they're not coming down. And that was Biden. That was all that money, the $1 trillion package and everything they threw on the end of that. So that is not going to help Trump, though, right? And not going to help the Republican candidates. The curveball that is so different here that we usually don't have is we've got this bizarre embracing. We got this Democratic Party internal fight over whether they want to go communist and socialist or not. And that's a whole new thing. Now, it could be bad for the Republicans because it could energize all these socialist communists, which evidently is a bigger section of the Democratic Party than people realize.
And we'll get to more of that in a minute.
And it could get them out to vote, right? It could be even more gasoline on the fire. But if the thing I keep thinking is, if the Republicans do a good job with ads and they've got something they can work with. And I'll tell you, we were in the Oval Office about a month ago on the Religious Liberty Commission doing our report and recommendation on what we'd seen from all the hearings with the president. And the president started the press conference by saying, we have communism and socialism breaking out around our country. And he said, but there's one thing that communism and socialism cannot not allow: God.
That's right.
And he said, that's why we have a Religious Liberty Commission. And I thought he really did. I thought that was really well said. People they don't understand the political systems of Marxism and communism and socialism. It is an anti-God, and God cannot exist, and religious freedom cannot exist because you are a child of the state. And this is how it works. And so that whole thing, has now been entered into the whole political campaign. We've got socialist candidates running across the country on the Democrat, and the Democrats are concerned. The more moderate Democrats are concerned because they're like, this is going to destroy us, right? You've got Islamicists, running. You've got Al-Sayed running, who believes all kinds of radical things. Of course, you got Mandami, who's already won. And so if the Republicans did a good job with ads that help, they have to be quick, they have to be simple. But if they did and said, this is an important vote. This is about whether we're moving into communism and socialism or about whether we're staying the United States of America. That is an opportunity for them. And the only reason I think there's a hope of that for them is that if you look at what happened in the Trump election where he won, one of the keys was towards the end, they caught on to this fact, I don't know why it took so long, that the transgender thing, the men and women sports and all this was like an 80-20 or 90-10 issue. And they started running the commercials. And all the Democrats were like, they were not moving off that issue. And it just decimated them. And so I think the socialism issue, the polling shows the country is not wanting to go that way. And if they ran those kinds of commercials and found some good ways that any Republican running could use, I think they would have a chance to, kind of beat the normal shift that occurs.
And again, this first article by Mark Lewis, we're going to get to another one by John McLaughlin in just a minute, talks about some of those examples. We broadcast in Michigan, and Abdul El-Sayed is, of course, running as a Democrat. We broadcast, of course, in Florida, Angie Nixon, which who would have ever guessed that one? And even in the state of Texas, where we're broadcasting right now, James Tallarico, and he points out that these are individuals who are more radical and in some respects have made statements that are seen as so anti-American that in some respects, Kelly, really some of the ads ride themselves, don't they?
They could. But I'll tell you this. I was just in a meeting with some people who nationally have followed this, and he said the Muslim communities are voting at like a 93% and above
we talked about that the
rate.
Other day. Yeah.
And the Christians are not. And so this is what determines the elections. You can have all these people that have these certain beliefs and values, but if they don't go vote, then they can easily be overcome by people with very different beliefs and values. So it really does depend upon people in churches all across the country and whether they'll just show up and vote. Even the same people who voted in the presidential election, will they show up for the midterms? That's what's going to determine a lot of this.
There's usually a drop-off, and Robert Knight was talking about that. If you really want to go back and understand how, again, Zoran Mamdani was elected as mayor, look at the percentage of just the Hispanic groups, the Muslim groups, and a few others voted for him, and it was just really striking. But again, just use the Muslim one compared to the Christian.
Yes.
We're lucky if 50% of the Christians can show up to vote, and so this is one where you don't sit out. Let's take a break, though. I've got some phone calls, so let's, again, when we come back from the break, get your thoughts. 1-800-351-1212. Garrett Bell and Kelly Shackelford in studio. This article here by Mark Lewis, Advantages and Disadvantages in the Coming Midterm Elections. We've already sort of alluded to one that we'll get to a little bit later. John McLaughlin, The Way to Reframe the Election, Capitalism versus Socialism, or for that matter, capitalism versus communism. We'll talk about that, take some phone calls right after this.
Texas Children's Hospital is the nation's largest freestanding pediatric hospital. Located in Houston, it ranks number 1 in Texas and in the top tier of children's hospitals in the U.S. The hospital was investigated for conducting a secret transgender medicine program and for committing fraud against Medicaid. The clinic was prescribing and performing gender transition treatments to minors as young as 11 and was miscoding procedures to conceal them from outside scrutiny. Concurrent with the 2023 investigation, the Texas governor signed a bill which codified a statewide ban on providing gender transition interventions, the drugs, hormones, and surgeries that were devastating the bodies of confused young people. A court settlement obtained by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton included a commitment by the hospital to never again carry out sex-rejecting procedures on minors. The settlement also requires that Texas Children's establish the nation's first detransition clinic. The clinic must provide free services for a period of 5 years for patients up to age 21 who have received gender transition interventions and now seek to reverse them. Sadly, a total do-over is not possible. Gender treatments, even puberty blockers, can effect undeniable changes. When someone starts taking cross-sex hormones or has sex-rejecting surgery, that person guarantees they'll be a patient for life. Attempts to reverse some of the damage will require access to multiple services and disciplines, including endocrinology, surgeries, and mental health. A cynical hospital spokesperson told the Texas Tribune, "This simply provides structure and a name for the services we currently provide." Detransitioners face intense backlash from the very community that once embraced them. A struggling young person can get lots of support online to transition, but mostly condemnation for a decision to detransition. The D-Trans Clinic opens in October. Let's pray these kids get real help. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Kelly Shackelford, Garrett Bell in studio with me. And let's go to Laura in Texas, because Laura, I think you have a comment or a question, so I'd love to hear from you.
Yes. I am just wondering, we don't have internet service at all, so I have just plain TV. But we are getting no ads for Paxton at all. And Telerico's ads just show him to be just the sweetest man, family man, and just making him out like he's the best grandson to his grandfather. And I'm just wondering if we can't get Tallarico's real views out there. I'm afraid people are going to be won over by just his loving ads, and they don't know what he believes and what he's going to do to us.
Well, I might just mention that the latest booklet I put out is on woke Christianity, and we've got a couple of those quotes in there. Kelly, you the other day sent to me, and I showed it to my wife, the low T Tallarico ads, but there is a concern, and that is we've oftentimes said that the mother's milk of politics is money. And
Yes.
Right now, I think it is fair to say that James Tallarico has raised much more money for this Texas campaign than Ken Paxton has.
Yeah, it's, I think the caller hit it on the head. The only reason the polls are close, because Texas is conservative, right? It's normally the conservative candidate. This reminds me a lot of the Ted Cruz and Beto race, when everybody was, you had these people that were so excited about Beto. And the money that came in, and this is what we have to point out, I think it's $70 or $80 million that's come in. It's coming from California.
Yes.
It's coming from Silicon Valley. It's not coming from Texas. So what they're doing is you've got people who are more liberal who want to see a Democrat senator, and so they're pouring in these money to portray him in a certain way. And that's all well and good until if the Republican candidate can equally get on television who Tallarico really is, the guy who says God is non-binary, who says Muslims and Christians, it's the same God, and all, there's just the whole litany of these things that somehow what's said in Scripture, where God comes to Mary and announces the Savior, that means that abortion is okay, and there's this whole litany of things that your average Texan would go, what? But they don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know. And if you don't get the money to do the ads, and they don't have to say what Tallarico said, they can just play it.
Yeah, and I've seen some of the ads doing that.
That's the ad I sent you, is they've collected
these internet ads, yeah.
But they've got to be able to get it out. And so the caller is pointing out all she's seeing, and it's because all of this money from out of state is coming in and running these ads, presenting one image of Tallarico. And they don't have to do much on Paxton, because in the Cornyn Paxton race, Cornyn ran like $100 million of attack ads on Paxton. So you've got the Republicans have beat down their own candidate so low, and now he can't even expose the other candidate. So that's the challenge, is money, and whether the commercials can get out where people can see that neither candidate is very perfect, but they have very different ideas on policy and on what kind of judges they would pick and on all the other things, certainly that any Christian would care about, all the issues and public policy positions. It couldn't be as dramatically different in any situation I can imagine than Tallarico and Paxton.
Garrett, one of the questions that people always have is, well, I don't like the candidates. Sometimes you have to think about how they're going to vote. And we just talked about all these incredible religious liberty victories. And I have a pretty good idea of the kind of people that Ken Paxton would vote for or vote against, and the kind of people that James Tallarico would vote for and vote against. And we can say the same thing about Abdul al-Sayed and Angie Nixon and some of the others I've mentioned. And so in some respects, you do have to pay attention to who they're going to put into office, who is going to be approved, what kind of legislation, and those are tough decisions, but they're the kinds of things people need to think about when they go to the polls in November, right?
That's right. And frankly, I think that people are being duped, especially people my age and younger. I think there are some who could even see those ads, see Tallarico's ads, hear the things that he's saying, and they're buying into it more and more. Like, yeah, God is accepting, and he wants to accept everyone, and he just wants to love everyone. And God gives us the ability to liberate ourselves to become who we want to be, that kind of thing. That is increasingly winning over people my age and younger.
And that's, I think, one of the real concerns. And it gets us to this other issue of capitalism versus socialism, because, Kelly, you know as well as I do, the younger you are, the more likely you are to think that socialism is a good idea. But James McLaughlin says, don't maybe pitch it in terms of Republican versus Democrat. pitch it in terms of, I believe in a free market where you have freedom to make choices, or a big government socialist where a bureaucrat makes decisions about you.
No, amen. I mean, that again, that's another one when I was talking about earlier about running ads. I mean, you could just take the Democratic Socialist interview with Shannon Bream, where they go through the platform.
Megan Romer,
Yeah.
just one. Yes, I agree. Yes, absolutely.
So
yes,
you're in
yes.
favor of getting rid of prisons? Yes. You're in favor of getting rid of the police? Yes. You want to abolish the Senate? Yes. You want to abolish the Electoral College? I mean, they're basically throwing off our Constitution. And if people understood that, I think that would be powerful in saying, I don't think I want to go with this side, because they're actually trying to go in a direction that would be incredibly destructive constitutionally to our country. And but if people don't see that, if people aren't educated, then they're not going to even know that that's what they're voting for. And it's not that they're misled in voting; they're misled and they don't even realize they should go vote. They don't even know there's election, really, Yeah,
that's a problem. Garrett, let me talk about that for just a minute, because if we want to reach the younger generation, I said recently in the piece that we did on socialism that one of the ways to talk to younger people is to say, do you like it when other people tell you what to do? No, I don't like that. Well, just think how much you would not like it if an unelected bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. told you what you can and cannot do. And it's almost like the lights go on all of a sudden, because socialism sounds fair. It's all about equality. It's all about fairness, until I realized that a handful of individuals will determine all sorts of things about what kind of products you can have, how fast you can drive, what kind of gasoline or non-use of gasoline you can use. And that's when all of a sudden the socialist utopia looks like a dystopia.
Oh, absolutely. And, framing the issue as capitalism versus socialism, it shouldn't be this way, but sometimes capitalism, people see that and they're all of a sudden skeptical, or they're put on their heels. I think it needs to be freedom versus socialism, right? And that's what capitalism is. It's a freedom to choose your own destiny as you wish, and make do with the resources that you have in your own possession. But there's a funny story I had from law school where I was sitting in a class and we got asked, if you had all of the money of royalty, would you give it all away? Don't you think that you ought to give it all away? And one of my classmates said, absolutely. That's your duty. You have all this money. You are supposed to give it away to everyone else. Later that day, I was in the parking garage getting in my tiny 2005 Ford Focus. And he drives by in a brand new Mercedes, SUV, and he waves at me. I was like, so they want to say, oh, you should be giving all your money away, but it's someone else's money. It's not their own.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the key. When we come back, we'll keep talking about this, and I'd love to get your thoughts. What are you seeing in some of the ads? Are you concerned that maybe we would have some Democratic Socialists in Congress? I think that's a given, at least in a few cases with the congressional districts, the way they are run, but we're going to get into that in more detail. And then we're going to talk about some other very important issues that are on the table that are going to obviously influence midterm elections, even affect your faith, your family, and your freedom. All that coming up right after this.
Have you ever met a child you knew would do great things? They displayed remarkable imagination, understanding, and a zest for learning. Now imagine someone takes that child and instead of fostering their potential with a real education, they feed them nothing but lies. That scenario isn't so far from reality. From a young age, Americans are fed a consistent stream of distorted facts, from the secular indoctrination they receive in many public schools, to the biases presented as fact in many colleges and universities, to the barrage of misinformation from the mainstream media and the lack of moral grounding in our society. It's not that Americans aren't capable of understanding the truth, it's that they aren't exposed to it enough. You can expose more Americans to the truth when you give to Point of View, where listeners receive facts, perspective, and biblical truth they don't get from society. As long as we have truth, we have hope. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this. Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. Do want to talk a little bit longer about socialism. I'm holding up right now, for those of you watching online, the August issue of Outlook on the rise of socialism. And the first piece is by Penna Dexter on Blue City Socialism. My piece is on the failing claims of democratic socialists, and that goes on for quite some time. Have a section here by Liberty McCarter on understanding the Marxist worldview, and then Gary Bauer on socialism and anti-Semitism. I do want to go around the round table in just a minute to talk about, there seems to be hand in glove socialism and anti-Semitism, and you guys have defended a lot of Jewish synagogues and individuals. But Kelly, just before the break, I thought it was helpful that you mentioned that piece. The co-chair of the Democratic Socialist of America. Her name is Megan Romer. Now, Shannon Bream, you know her very well. You've interviewed with her many times. Actually took the time to go through every one of the planks of the DSA platform. I won't bore you, other than just to say that, yes, absolutely, or we're going to get to that. And if that's not bad enough, about a week later, a writer with the New Yorker, which is kind of left of center, asked some of the same questions and really pressed her, and that was certainly eye-opening as well. And so Charles Cook, who we've quoted many times, said, you know, I've got to give her credit for her thoroughness, because she says in the space of a minute, she managed to demand the abolition of every load-bearing structure in America. For example, to abolish the Senate is not only to abolish the states, but to abolish the Union too. To abolish the Supreme Court is to abolish the rule of law. To abolish our borders and our military is to abolish our sovereignty. To abolish prisons is to abolish ordered liberty. And to abolish private property is to abolish our economy. That's pretty thorough, don't you think?
Yes, it's a complete overthrow of our,
it's unbelievable,
of our country. And this is why, you know, again, I think it's a gift to the Republican side, which otherwise I think would be looking at a very, 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 you know, hopeless situation in the election. But I think there's this other thing that's going on that's probably more important than the fact that the economy is a little worse than it was because of the Iran war. Again, most of the difficulty that those that are experiencing from the economy came from the Biden administration. It's just, you know, it bumped everything up, right? Dramatically, 30%, not 4%. But, you know, Trump's not helping by the Iran war, and so it's still going up a little bit. Not like Biden. And so that's bothersome. But if every American really caught on to the fact that they're voting between this new approach, which basically throws off our constitutional system, and that this is not a theory of somebody running. There are literally candidates running all over the country, and there's a fight within the Democratic Party. They might have the majority. Then I think that would change the people that aren't voting. But I just don't know. I mean, similar to Ken Paxton versus Tallarico. Is there going to be any money to run ads for people to even know who Tallarico is? Tallarico's not having to run any ads on Paxton, really, because Cornyn ran 100 million of them. And the issue is people are busy. They're raising their families. They're working.
Sure.
They're not keeping up with this. And if somebody doesn't get the message out to them, they're not going to know.
Let's take some more phone calls. Ian in Wyoming, thank you for calling today.
Hello. Hey, how's it going, guys?
We'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. So, I mean, we got you live on the phone here. We've been listening. And, yeah, it's a shame. I think people turning away from Donald Trump after what's been promised and the inflation here, we're paying a lot more money for things. And the college student, I don't have it in the budget. So seeing promises made and let down again, another disappointment by politicians. something we would hope to change soon. You know, all these talks to releasing Epstein files, to fixing Iran, to getting out of wars, none of them seem to fall through, and we always get told it'll be happening later or later. And I'd wish to not see that from our leaders in this country.
I think you've got a good point. There is a real disappointment. And Garrett, since you're the youngest around the table, let's talk about the younger generation that says, I've heard promises and I haven't seen them fulfilled. We're hoping that this issue of affordability, which again is one of the articles that we've got right here, would be better. Now, I think some of that has to do with something even beyond the control of either Republican or Democratic presidents. The value of the dollar keeps dropping every single year. And so it takes more dollars to buy assets. So you get this K-shaped economy. Supreme Court, I should say, the various aspects of the financial system today and the various stocks and other things are going up dramatically, whereas people's wages are going down. I think Ian probably represents a number of others that said, hey, I did everything right. I went to school. I got a degree. I've got this enormous amount of student debt. I can't buy a house. Maybe he can, but some are saying that. I feel like I'm not being employed at a level that is there. So stock market's going up, my wages are going down, and I think that's another one of those headwinds that any elected official, whether Republican or Democrat, is going to have to address in this election.
Yeah, I think some of it comes down to a little bit of illiteracy when it comes to economics. People my age and younger thinking that, okay, things aren't working right now. They're not attributing it to the fact that the Biden administration caused mass inflation with stimulus checks. I mean, decisions by the Fed to lower interest rates to 2%. I mean, the housing market is an absolute mess because no one wants to move. Why would I lose the 2% interest rate? And obviously the price of homes bumped up by, large percentage points and hasn't come back down. So I get all of that. But where we're in danger is socialists, people running far left progressivism or socialism. It's grievance politics, right? It's about grievance. It's about bitterness. It's about a lack of gratitude. Yes, things are harder for me. I have 2 kids, and we can't do as many things as we want to do. But I look around my neighborhood, suburbs of North Dallas, and I'm looking at these homes that have stone and turrets and some incredible architectural detail. Like, this is what kings had. This is what kings had centuries ago.
Yeah.
And a normal middle class American can afford a home that looks like that on an acre. Bathrooms that are 2,000 square feet. I mean, it's incredible, right? And so I think that we have to educate people my age on gratitude. Like, look what you have gained from a system that encourages productivity. Don't listen to these people that just simply want to abolish or overthrow everything. That's thought terminating. They're not thinking through. They're just saying a jargon word.
Going to take a break and come back and get some other comments and some more phone calls, too. Got a couple of suggestions on maybe how people could maybe bring in some key people in campaigns to make a difference. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I think we'll stay on this a little bit longer. A little bit later, we will get to an interesting study, left-wing violence and transgender ideology. Who would have guessed? Well, I think we would have figured that out a long time ago. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Lack of commitment is one of the biggest problems in marriage and relational formation. J.P. DeGance has been on my radio program to talk about what the church needs to do to build strong marriages and strengthen existing ones. In the past, we've talked about his initial research. This time, he talked about 2 factors that are hurting marriage commitment. Cohabitation is the first negative factor in marriage. As I've mentioned in previous commentaries, we discussed also on the radio, cohabitation has gone from being rare to routine. He reported that most engaged couples seeking premarital counseling are living together. That mindset changes from "till death do us part" to "as long as love shall last." His latest statistics suggest that couples that cohabit have a 60 to 80% higher divorce rate. The other negative factor in marriage is dating apps. The linked article has the sensational title, "Dating Apps Are Treating People Like Shoes on Amazon." He argues that these apps are not neutral tools. They are structurally harmful to the kind of relational orientation that healthy marriages require because they treat potential partners as commodities. It is essentially becoming a business model of cost-benefit analysis that has become optimized for consumer choice and frictionless exit. This is not the mindset you want to have if you want to build strong marriages and families. These apps train users in habits that work against commitment. The subtitle of the attached article is "Here's What That Means for the Church." That is why I raise this issue. Pastors and Christian leaders need to warn young adults of the mindset that develops once you use these dating apps. If you want a congregation of strong marriages and stable families, we need to address this issue. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with us today, Kelly Shackelford, Garrett Bell, and let's, if we can, go to, I believe it is Karen in Reno, Nevada. And Karen, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. I was thinking as you were talking that candidates would do well to enlist the voices of people who have lived under communism or socialism and give them a firsthand experience and let them know that they were made the same promises that they're hearing now, and those things totally failed them.
I think that's a great illustration. And of course, we've had Ted Cruz's father on to talk about what it was like in Cuba. We've had a couple of guests that have grown up in Venezuela and told us about what was being promised by Hugo Chavez. So it does seem to me that maybe the best thing we can do is educate this next generation about socialism.
Yeah, obviously a book we've talked about a lot that's great on that is Live Not by Lies by Rod Dreher. And he goes and interviews people and that were in a lot of the communist countries and really learned and sort of laid out what it was like, how it happened, and how they defeated it. And these people now are like in their 80s, and they they all said they're terrified at what they're seeing in the United States. And I thought it was a really excellent book. And this goes to the problem. I just saw a few weeks ago that DeSantis in Florida had said that they're now going to start teaching. It's going to be required in all the schools, the public schools there, to teach about communism and socialism and what it really is.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why have we not been doing that? I mean, a lot of us who are a little bit of age that are listening right now, they're like, well, yeah, I read that, but I think that kind of got moved out. And so many of the younger people don't know. They haven't seen the history of how so many millions and millions of people end up being murdered in these societies, whether it's Mao Zedong, whether it's Stalin, whether you name it. I mean, it's an incredible evil that follows these promises of nirvana that never show up, and it's always so weird because these systems are an anti-God system. Mm-hmm. They don't want to believe in God. It's atheism, but their system is is bizarre, because what they say is, if you'll just throw off and destroy the current system, a new, beautiful, wonderful nirvana system will just arise.
Yeah.
They don't have any answers. There's no how this is going to happen. It's just destroy what is there, and so as Garrett was saying, it's a grievance, is what it is. It's I don't like what's happened to me, so I want to destroy. Now, those of you who are Christians who are listening, where do you think that feeling, that thought comes from? Is it from God, or is it from a different kingdom? And so that's what's so fascinating about this, is people don't even think through where this goes, and they're not being taught. They should be taught the history. Nowhere where this has been tried has it worked. And in fact, not only did it not work, it leads to murder of millions of people. It leads to devastation. It leads to poverty. It leads to the worst things that happen to people. And so, but if people aren't educated, then they don't know, and it just sounds really nice.
I might just mention that, again, on our little booklet on socialism, we actually have a quote from Dinesh D'Souza, who we've had many times at our banquets and things like that. And he gives you the whole long list of different countries, and there's more than 24 that have tried it. And, of course, everyone is a failure. And so, again, you're thinking, why don't they learn that? Well, what they're learning instead, as we've talked about this week, is Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, who is a Marxist and spends most of his time not talking about the dangers of socialism, but actually the danger of the United States. And we even had a quote that we posted the other day by Dennis Prager, who one time had Howard Zinn say on his radio program that the world would be better off if the United States had never existed, which I think just shows you the kind of things that are not being taught in the schools. So 3 cheers for those in Florida. They're now going to learn about some of the dangers of socialism. But just before we get to a break, I thought very quickly, this one we can handle pretty quickly, is a new study that's come out. And Matt Vespa asked the question, did we really need to spend money on a study like this? And Kelly, you've heard me say this before. I probably said it too many times, that we spend millions of dollars every year to actually document what the average person through common sense already knows. Yep. And he said these findings are like, well, we found out that smoking causes lung cancer. What a surprise. This one is a study that found a link. Are you ready for this? Between leftist violence and transgender ideology. And all you have to do is, as he says, look at some of the things happening at the WNBA games right now. Charlie Kirk, of course, was assassinated by somebody who was flirting with transgenderism. The school shootings, you can talk about ones that were taking place in Tennessee and Minnesota and other places. How about the individual that wanted to kill Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who we found out later was, quote, a transgender woman, if you want to use that phrase. And I don't think anybody's terribly surprised by finding out that there is a very definite link, which has been established by Rutgers University, the Manhattan Institute, and the Network Contagion Research Institute, that what a surprise. Leftist ideology, and especially transgender ideology, leads to violence.
Yeah. I mean, not a shocker.
Not a shocker.
Right? It's, I mean, what are the number of transgender people in the country?
I know, it's just a fraction of a percent,
it's a fraction.
I would think. Yeah.
Well, what is the percentage of these shooters
yes,
who are transgender? And I mean, immediately it's just off the charts compared to that. So, kind of obvious. And again, I think that it goes back a little bit to something that I thought it's just so cruel, right? People that have it's gender dysphoria, right? I mean, they've got a mental issue that, you know, some people can work through and come back. Some people need help. And the idea that you take people that have a problem and you start chopping body parts off, and you start, especially to young children, and do this. How cruel is that? How evil is that? Instead of helping people, you almost put them in situations that they can never come back from. Certainly on the physical side, and so this is a lack of courage of people speaking the truth, of loving people by helping them. not by feeding whatever they want you to go along with. It's something that we used to be better at. But now I think people have really lost their courage to speak the truth in love, which sometimes is not easy, but it's what's required of every Christian.
We'll come back to the transgender issue a little bit later because we have the D-Trans clinic that Penna Dexter has written a commentary about. But I thought just for a minute, Garrett, the study looked at 6 potential targets: killing Charlie Kirk, killing Donald Trump, killing Brian Thompson. Of course, he was the health care issue, arson of ICE buildings, and damaging wealthy people's property and violence against police. And unfortunately, for a number of individuals, not just, of course, those who have transgender beliefs, but younger people, they sort of have seen that normalized. And so, again, this is not only an ideological issue, it's becoming a little bit of an age issue as well. Younger generation almost feels like they are justified in supporting and cheering on some people that have actually committed murder.
Yeah, I think generally there are a few studies showing that the younger generations are overall supportive of acts of violence in order to, accomplish an outcome. I think you're right to say transgender ideology. Ideas have consequences, and there is an ideology wrapped up in this. It's not isolated. It's very much connected to Marxism, right? Marxism was about economic concerns, but then there's cultural Marxism, which was elevated to say, well, there's a reason that, the proletariat isn't revolting. It's because the elites are, oppressing them and holding them down, and they can't think for themselves. But generally, what we're being taught in schools is that there's no human sin. That in that ideology, there's no moral compass, right? It's just conflict. There's conflict, and then there's synthesis of that. And it's just, there's no direction to humanity. It's just what is. And so if there's no moral component to it, then why is violence wrong?
Yeah.
If it leads to the conflict that leads to the outcome you want.
Again, ideas have consequences. Bad ideas have victims. And that's one of the things we're seeing there. Let's take a break. When we come back, did want to talk a little bit about Iran, the Iranian deal. We also, of course, have Penna Dexter's piece. And as always, we like to end with some prayer targets. And actually, when we talk about all these 9 cases before the Supreme Court, I think that'll be our prayer target for today. And we might even put it in our Pray for America email that goes out. Let's take a break. We'll be right back.
I'm sure that you've noticed that social media is now filled with information generated by AI. Dramatic descriptions of politicians and music stars supposedly making statements about a current issue, leaning into the microphone, looking into the lens, opponents silenced. It's powerful, it's riveting, and it's all lies. Even several national television networks were recently found using enhanced pictures, meaning manipulated, falsified, literally not giving a true picture. So many liars, so much deception. Where can we turn for truth? Right here. From Kerby and the team at Point of View, we need your support. Please join the Point of View Truth Team today with a monthly gift of $30 or more. Together, we can shine the light of truth and dispel the darkness and deception of this day. Give now at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151, pointofview.net and 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let me just mention this week we've spent a fair amount of time talking about Islam and even Sharia law, and that's certainly something that has surfaced not only in this country, but I want to go back to Iran for just a few minutes because we've posted a piece, comes from our friends at Newsmax, pointing out that the Prime Minister of Israel, of course that's Benjamin Netanyahu, said that he really doubts that any kind of diplomatic agreement can be reached with the Iranian leadership. This is why you've had the economic D-Day that was announced this week by the Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent. And as a result of the economic pressure, military action, and the rest may be the only way to achieve that. And since we've been talking about the midterms, I thought for just a minute we would point out that indeed this economic pressure is having a significant impact. The oil is making its way through by using different routes. There are also various kinds of pipelines that are being developed so that the Strait of Hormuz will be less of an issue. But that's in the future. Matter of fact, if you look at fuel futures, especially for oil futures, 3 years from now, it's actually lower because they're actually, I think, convinced that these pipelines will completely make the Strait of Hormuz insignificant. But for the moment, it's still going to affect an election, Kelly. And so that's one of the reasons why this week we spent some time talking about what's going on in Iran.
Yeah, and obviously for most people, it's the economy, right? And when you're in a war, there's issues on the economy, and it's really somewhat amazing to me that it hadn't been worse than it is. I mean, if you look at the inflation level, I mean, yeah, it's not great where we want it to be, but it's not 30%, it's not 10%, it's not, it's just eking up as somewhat normally it would. But the point is, it could be better. I mean, Trump could be riding on like a great economic comeback, because a lot of the policies they did do, have been helpful. But you add that and you add the tariffs and some of these things, and it's just kind of eat things up. So he doesn't have a positive there. And some people, that's all they're focusing on is the economy, right? But gosh, what do? You can't let Iran have nuclear weapons, right? Not. I mean, they would wipe out Israel and the United States. And they wouldn't wipe out the United States because we support Israel. They just wipe us out because they've always hated us anyway. They've been killing our people for decades. So what do you do? Because they don't seem to care what happens. So I think this is the latest. Whatever you think of Trump, man, he's got 50 million different negotiations and strategies and tactics, and now they're on the strangling tactic, which is, I think, probably it's the safest for the United States. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It definitely has an impact. It's obvious we've decided that the people of Iran are innocent. I mean, they slaughtered 40 or 50,000 of them when they said they wanted their country back. And so, because if we wanted to, we could cripple Iran, right? We could take out all their power. We could take out all of their water. We could, bomb their dams. We could just decimate the place. But they're not going to do that. They've decided they don't want to do that. There's a small group of Islamic radicals who are in control of things, and so how do you get rid of that small group? And I don't know. I don't know if anything works, but at least this one is more of an economic pressure, and maybe it will bring, I don't know if it can, but bring the people to take back their country. I just wish regular Iranians had control of their country.
I do too. 90 million people that are facing economic devastation that has come. Now, what's so interesting is that just the other day, our ambassador to the United Nations made the statement. He says, I've been around enough Iranian leaders to know that they're more fearful of the Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, than they are fearful of the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, because they recognize they can endure the loss of various kinds of military apparatus and even some of the destruction of the infrastructure, but they cannot endure, and you cannot keep the RGC going when you are not getting any kind of funding that is coming in. So it's having an impact on Iran. It's having an incredible impact on China because the number one purchaser of Iranian oil is China.
Yes.
And again, just Garrett, for just a minute, we earlier in the week had Lana Silk on. She wrote a very good piece in the Washington Times, but she told the story on the program about growing up in Iran. And every day you would go out into the schoolyard and then you would chant death to America. And then, of course, becoming a Christian in the midst of that, leaving that, and being in this country, she says, don't ignore radical Islam, not only over there, but even what's happening here in the United States. So this, I think, is a lesson that we need to pass on to the next generation. And I don't know that it's going to have an impact on the vote, but I would certainly say that we are safer in the Middle East than we were back in October 2023 when Hamas was actually going into Israel and killing all those people. Hamas is weaker. Hezbollah is weaker. The Houthis are weaker. Iran is weaker. And because of that, the Middle East is safer.
Right. Yeah. Part of me wonders if going into this, I mean, I'm sure the best minds in the country were in a room together before launching the war. But part of me wonders if there was an underestimation of the culture of Iran and how that would contribute to how easy the negotiations would be. Right. There's this obstinance that maybe we don't see in Western countries in dealing with negotiations, that they don't want to be humiliated, and they're not going to back down near as easily as we would expect them to.
Yeah. And again, Donald Trump is a deal maker. You've been with him more than a few times. He's a transactional president, more than any president I can remember. Yeah. And that's some of it.
And you can't, I mean, how do you negotiate with pathological liars?
Yeah.
And people who, it reminds me of the old Monty Python movie with the knight that says you can't pass here, and they knock his leg off, and they knock his other leg off, and he keeps fighting, and they knock his arms off, and now he's got no arms and no legs. And he says, I'm not moving. I'm going to bite your legs off. And it's kind of like Iran.
Just a sluff.
Yeah.
Room,
yeah. And it's like, what does it take? Everything's been taken away. Your Navy's at the bottom of the sea, everything else. I mean, what other country have you seen that is like that? I mean, so obviously I think what Garrett was saying, they must have miscalculated. But at the same time, as you say, I mean, Iran was funding a lot of evil around the world. Hamas, the Houthis. I mean, we could go on and on and on. I mean, they were the source of the funding. And the fact that we've kind of taken Karg Island, we've kind of blockaded that. The Strait of Hormuz, where their oil's coming through. And I think I saw just the last day or so that we're going to start confiscating their oil, I think.
Yes.
And, I mean, now this is having an impact. And whatever happens between the United States and Iran and how that works out, that's saving a lot of terrorism that would be going on, around the world from these groups that get their funding from Iran. And so I don't know. We just need to really pray for the Middle East, pray for wisdom for our own leaders. I hope there's a way to get out of this. I hope this stranglehold. I've seen some articles in the last week or two about how this has been a strategy that has been very successful in past battles in the United States, where that was the real solution. And so I'm hoping it is a solution. And of course, the greatest of all things, which maybe it's a little optimistic, but would be for the Iranian people to be able to take over their country.
That's really what you would hope.
And I would also add, praying for the young, like people in the United States that are being influenced by propaganda.
Yes.
Right. You mentioned yourself that, okay, there's the on the ground strategy over there that we have to win, but we have to win a war of ideas that is taking place here in our country.
Yes.
And there are absolutely people who are intervening to try to influence thoughts on Israel and Iran and the Middle East.
A couple of prayer targets even for that. Of course, one is, Operation Economic Outcast. That's the economic D-Day. Another is, as we've talked about on 2 different occasions this week, the fastest growing church by percentage is the church in Iran, and more individuals. And we had all sorts of stories from both of our guests over time in terms of them seeing visions of Jesus or meeting Christians and reading the Bible. And of course, they don't have established church, but there are certainly so many many of those individuals. So again, I feel sorry for the people, the 90 million people in Iran that didn't ask for this, but they are not well served by their leaders. But nevertheless, that is something to be praying about as well. We take a break, though. When we come back, one of the things we always encourage you to do is, if you're on the computer, you can listen to Penna Dexter's commentary. We always air it right now. It's on the D-Trans Clinic. We talked just a minute ago about transgenderism, and this whole issue of transgenderism has changed dramatically, in part because of some reports that have come even from the Trump administration. So we'll talk about that right after this.
Texas Children's Hospital is the nation's largest freestanding pediatric hospital. Located in Houston, it ranks number 1 in Texas and in the top tier of children's hospitals in the U.S. The hospital was investigated for conducting a secret transgender medicine program and for committing fraud against Medicaid. The clinic was prescribing and performing gender transition treatments to minors as young as 11 and was miscoding procedures to conceal them from outside scrutiny. Concurrent with the 2023 investigation, the Texas governor signed a bill which codified a statewide ban on providing gender transition interventions, the drugs, hormones, and surgeries that were devastating the bodies of confused young people. A court settlement obtained by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton included a commitment by the hospital to never again carry out sex-rejecting procedures on minors. The settlement also requires that Texas Children's establish the nation's first detransition clinic. The clinic must provide free services for a period of 5 years for patients up to age 21 who have received gender transition interventions and now seek to reverse them. Sadly, a total do-over is not possible. Gender treatments, even puberty blockers, can effect undeniable changes. When someone starts taking cross-sex hormones or has sex-rejecting surgery, that person guarantees they'll be a patient for life. Attempts to reverse some of the damage will require access to multiple services and disciplines, including endocrinology, surgeries, and mental health. A cynical hospital spokesperson told the Texas Tribune, "This simply provides structure and a name for the services we currently provide." Detransitioners face intense backlash from the very community that once embraced them. A struggling young person can get lots of support online to transition, but mostly condemnation for a decision to detransition. The D-Trans Clinic opens in October. Let's pray these kids get real help. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that, first of all, Penna Dexter's commentary, which we've posted on our website, a D-Trans Clinic. We'll talk more about that in just a minute, but also my commentary today. And if you would like to receive those in your inbox, what we do is you just give us your email, and then we send to you my commentary Monday through Friday, Penna Dexter's, which we've just heard right now. If you were listening on the computer, we send to you on Saturday. Now, the point she was making is one of the examples here in the state of Texas is the Texas Children's Hospital, which had in some respects the largest freestanding pediatric hospital, is also one that was conducting secret transgender medicine. Now, to broaden that, just a week or two ago, I had a chance to interview on this program one of the individuals that had actually helped write this piece, and it came from the Department of Health and Human Services.
Yep.
Wolves Wolves in white coats, how doctors and hospitals pushed and profited from the fraud of gender medicine. As I pointed out when we did the interview, usually government reports are kind of ambiguous and pretty benign. Wolves in white clothes, coats. I mean, that was pretty good.
Yeah.
And what they pointed out, and I'm just going to pick one example, is so that they could hide all of this, they would use medical codes like endocrine disorder or precocious puberty, so that they didn't have to say, well, you're actually paying for gender transitions. And Kelly, you're shaking your head because we know that once you transition a boy into a girl or a girl into a boy, it's basically, as they pointed out, a lifelong revenue stream.
Right.
So that 64-page report from the Department of Health and Human Services, or you can go to the UK, the Cass report that comes from Dr. Hilary Cass 2 years ago, they're all saying, there is no evidence that this helps individuals with gender transition, and instead it's become a money-making operation, and they've been committing fraud against Medicaid.
Yeah, boy, there's a couple of things that are so obvious from all this that most people don't think about. One is we spent a lot of time earlier talking about Tallarico and Paxton. Okay, whatever you think of Paxton's personal life and the problem he had in his marriage and all that, that's now gone. But public policy, this is what he did, right? I mean, he did this law. He went after this hospital. He's the one that, so, you know, it really you're not you're putting people in office to do the public policy positions that you're for. And so that should be the comparison. Tallarico was in office as a state representative. What did he do? What did he propose? What positions did he? That should be. Now, you're not going to see any commercials about most of that. It's Tallarico sitting with his grandfather, right? I mean, but this kind of thing, I mean, this affects real lives. Right? A lot of children are not going to be mutilated now because of this. And I also think of, like, one of our interns years ago was a young attorney by the name of Jordan Campbell. And he and some other guys went out, worked at big law, you know, where you can make a lot of money at the big law firms. They left to start a law firm to solely represent these people. And this is before anybody was willing to do anything like that. And he was a part of that team in the Department of Justice that accomplished all of this. So, you know what? You can really make a difference. You don't have to do the regular thing. You can actually be called by God to go and make a difference and help. You know, this is going to affect, you know, I mean, children all over the country. But it started in Texas, and it started because of an attorney general who actually had a good policy position and fought for the right position for attorneys who were willing to not make as much money and go do something that would affect people's lives. And so I think we forget a lot of that in the process sometimes.
And one thing she does talk about is the fact that we've had detransitioners. We've actually talked about this before, and Penna has sat here and done some interviews. So has Liberty with some of these individuals. And they've faced, as she points out, intense backlash because you're not allowed to say, well, I'm going to change my mind. It's okay to go one direction, not okay to go the other. And this detrans clinic is going to open up in another month or two. And so we'll be talking about that as well.
First one in the country.
And it just is illustrative of these kinds of issues. But one of the other issues that sort of relates to this is that we've had Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez say, you know, some of that just came from woke 1.0, but we're now in woke 2.0. But woke 1.0, they said, well, we were just a little bit too crazy with the pandemic and the lockdown. Well, we were also crazy by burning down police headquarters. We were maybe a little too crazy with some of this idea of promoting trans issues. And I don't know, but gender manipulation and woke 2.0 still seems to be around, at least at the WNBA and a few other places. What about that?
Yeah, I don't, as far as the difference between woke 1.0 and 2.0, I mean, I don't see any difference at all, really. I mean, one, it shows me her statements about woke 1.0. I mean, words coming from her mouth, you know, like they are justifying these things. They were justifying those things back then, and now they're trying to distance themselves from it, you know, like they were lying. But the concern is that with transitioning, I mean, one, there's the harm to the human person, the
course.
human person that is undergoing that kind of surgery or treatment, especially if it's a child. Two, there is the harm of those around them. And at First Liberty, we might see cases like this where it's, someone who either one is speaking against transitioning and is being kicked out of an arena for it, or being kicked out of a public place for it because we no longer have tolerance for reasonable views. There is the woman that can't feel safe in a shelter, a women's shelter, because now there's a policy of, well, we're going to be agnostic to whether or not, a biological man walks in here or not. But then a bigger question is, as a civilization, I mean, I think that we have lessons throughout history, including Rome, where if we can't call a duck, that has significant consequences.
It sure does.
It's got deleterious effects. So there's a number of reasons that we have to counter it.
Well, again, I love the fact that Bill Maher is talking about those issues. And in the Senate, well, we just at least have John Fetterman and a few others, but not too many. But just before I wind it down, Kelly, one of the things we encourage people to do is to pray for, of course, Pray for America. We have our Pray for America email that goes out. But I think this one would be a good one. And this is, again, the First Liberty Insider. I'm holding up my copy, and you can get one as well by signing up. But you have... This one says 7. Now I'm going to have to change it to 9 cases before the Supreme Court, including one that you already have. And this, I think, illustrates again why we need to be praying, because right now these justices will be looking at these cases and deciding out of whatever 50 or 60 cases which ones will actually be used.
Yeah, I would encourage people to pray. Number one, if they're not getting it, as you said, I think we have about 850,000 people. Doesn't cost anything. You just sign up on the website, say, I'd like to get the email, the Insider on Fridays, and it'll update you. And it can help you see what to pray for. And this is something to pray for. We have got a good Supreme Court right now, right? Especially on the religious liberty issues. We need to get good cases up there. And so really pray. We've got an opportunity like we've never seen. We've never had this many. And there's some real opportunity to create some really good decisions that will protect families, parents, religious freedom, churches all across the country. And just pray. We need prayer cover for them to grab the right ones.
Well, that's all we have for today. And Garrett, great to meet you face to face. And I hope people find out more about what is at First Liberty. We do have the link. You can click on the picture of Kelly or Garrett, and that will take you, of course, to firstliberty.org and all the other places where you would need to go. As always, want to thank Megan for help engineering the program today. The other Megan for helping as well, Derek, with the phones. And we encourage you to enjoy the weekend. See you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
Where does moral truth come from? According to 58% of Americans, individuals determine moral truth. A quarter of Generation Z says society determines moral truth, and morality can even change over time. Only 42% of Americans believe that truth comes from God. I don't know about you, but I find these numbers extremely troubling. It really is a crisis of truth, and that crisis has consequences. Look at society. Evil is called good, good called evil. People with biblical beliefs are called bigots, or worse, they're canceled. But there is hope. The Bible promises the truth will set us free, and that's why Point of View is relentless in our commitment to the ultimate source of moral truth, God's Word. At Point of View, we know that God's truth is eternal, and if we stand together, we can help more Americans apply His truth in their daily life. Help Americans find truth again by giving at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.